Thank you, Joshua, for being here in Vienna to celebrate the premiere of your film in Austria. I would like to maybe start with the connection between the films you made before, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, and both of them documentaries, and this is your first fiction film in this length as well. Can you guide us through a little bit how it came to this story, especially, but also making a fiction film now?
Yeah. So after making The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, I really wanted to make a third film in Indonesia about the oligarchs who came to wealth and power through genocide, and who'd enriched themselves over decades because the whole country was terrified of them, so they could get away with murder. And after The Act of Killing was released in Indonesia, I could not safely return to Indonesia. So I started researching oligarchs elsewhere and focused on a family that was in the oil business. The oil tycoon, the father, wanted to live forever, and he was buying his family a bunker. And the father had commissioned some pretty awful political violence in his country. We went to visit that bunker, and I found myself too afraid to ask the really obvious questions that were sort of screaming from the walls of this place. It was a bunker much like the one you've seen. They were planning to have their art collection there and a wine cellar. It wasn't yet finished, so it was more of a cave structure. They were finishing up, or they would finish up. But the questions that I was dying to ask were, how would you cope with the guilt for the apocalypse or the catastrophe from which you would be fleeing? How would you cope with the remorse for relatives that you left behind? How would you tell the new generation of people who they plan to raise and give birth to in the bunker? How would you tell your story to them as a way of maybe easing your conscience and whitewashing your past, obscuring your past from yourself, as I think you put it in the introduction that you thankfully read for me. So all of those questions were on my mind, and I realized the film I wish I could make here was the fly-on-the-wall documentary in this bunker 25 years after the family moved in. And obviously I wasn't going to hang around for that, and wouldn't be welcome and wouldn't be alive. So I left unsure what to do, and on the flight home, to sort of get some distance on those questions that were haunting me, I watched one of my very favorite films on my laptop just as a kind of to clear my head, and it's Jacques Demy's The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And instantly I knew what I would do. I knew that I wouldn't make a documentary with this family. I would instead make a musical. It would be an American family because it's an American genre, and it would be set in the bunker 25 years later, and it would be called The End.
Maybe just a small side question: does this family that you've been researching with, do you think they know about the film, and have you been contacted by them?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. They may well, because they may well, and I'm sure they'll recognize that themselves. Little detail, but I haven't been in touch with them about it.
All right. Is there a first question? Yeah, in the very, very back. Please wait for the microphone. Yeah, it's already there.
Hi, thank you. I think about real-world examples. You have Peter Thiel, a billionaire co-founder of PayPal. He's bought a self-sufficient retreat in New Zealand. Or Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, self-sufficient retreat in the US. So the rich always think they can escape the crises they create. Watching your movie, you humanize such people. What is the message you hope people take from your movie?
You know, I think it's tempting to see this film as a satire about, or to expect a satire about a wealthy family that we can look at from a distance and judge from a distance. But ultimately, I think the characters are nameless because they are us. This is, I hope in them, I think if you come into this film expecting a kind of eat the rich satire, I imagine it's pretty disappointing. I think it's the message is that this is an allegory for all of humanity. Yes, it's an allegory for some powerful people too who have escaped justice but have not escaped punishment. And it seems to be perhaps a film about the future and about a future that only they inherit because only they are wealthy enough and privileged enough to survive it. But I think it's really about the present, about the way we all lie to ourselves, tell stories, deceive ourselves, cling to a kind of false optimism. We daily hear we daily hear a kind of increasing mountain of facts that tell us we're careening toward the abyss as a human family. And the way we cope with that defensively very often is to tell ourselves, well, everything will work out somehow, because otherwise we don't know what to do. And that optimism is a false optimism. It's actually despair and powerlessness masquerading as optimism. And while it may be too late for the last human family in the film, I don't believe it's too late for us. You don't make a cautionary tale, a dystopian view of our present. You don't make a wake-up call if you think it's too late for us to wake up. So for the hundreds of people who made this film with me, and those of you who've opened your heart to its challenge to be more honest with yourselves, with your family members, with your loved ones, with your neighbors, with the people who are trying to get into this country and into Fortress Europe, but whom we exclude and knowingly allow to drown as they cross the sea trying to reach us, to escape conditions of immiseration that we impose on them and which we profit from through the cheap clothing we wear, the cheap food that we eat, the cheap electronics that we buy. We, for all of that, whenever we knowingly turn our backs on that, we willingly submit to living in a bunker. I think each of us, in some way or another, are impoverishing our lives and limiting our chance to have to make a meaningful mark on this earth and to have full relationships of love with the people around us because of the small ways that we each live in bunkers. So I would say this is a film about all of us, and it's a gesture of my deep optimism that I made it and that I offered it to you, and for everyone who opened your heart to meet it. That to me is an act of optimism too. And I think we're in a moment where now it's not too late for us to look at the damage we're doing, to seek forgiveness for it, to forgive ourselves so that we can acknowledge that damage and actually change course before it's too late.
I unfortunately already received a sign, so I think we can take one more question. Okay, 3 arms. We have 2 in the back. Maybe if it's quick questions, we can do them. Is it working?
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
It's actually a very simple question. Why choose musical as an art form?
I think the musical, that it is a musical is what makes this film not a bleak science fiction story about a family struggling to survive an end of the world scenario. It's what makes the film about false hope. In musicals, traditionally, in classic musicals, what gets a character singing is when their truth is too big for dialogue. This is a kind of anti-musical in the sense that actually, I think the music that Joshua Schmidt has written is luminously beautiful. It's soaring, it's kaleidoscopic, but it's a lie. What gets them singing are these moments of doubt where they realize, because of the arrival of girl or because of truths that they're confronting each other with, that the stories they tell themselves, that allow them to get up, the lies they tell themselves, the false hope that they tell themselves that allow them to get up in the morning and look in the mirror is falling apart. And they sort of reach desperately for song, for music, new music, to console to console themselves so that they can cope again, so that they can repress the awful truth again. And so I think in this musical, it's not the truth that sings, it's the lies, and the truth screams through in the silences.
I think we can take the other question quickly as well. Is the microphone already there? There was one in the back, no? Already gone? Yes.
So, how was it making that shift from fact to fiction, from documentary to feature film? Was it intimidating? Do you see yourself returning to this type of movie in the future?
This type of movie?
Well, not musical necessarily. But
I would love to make another musical. I grew up in a family where my parents divorced, and I had the role in the family of being the one who told, sort of, just maybe because I was the youngest, I was the one who reassured my father and reassured my mother that their version, their narrative of what happened was correct and was okay. And of course their stories contradicted each other, so it meant that I was kind of inherently probably a liar or lying to myself and a pleaser. And I think you've seen a lot of that aspect of me in George Mackay's character, the son. And when you make a documentary, as in a fiction film, you're always looking, or I'm always looking for authenticity. And I define authenticity as those moments that when you're shooting, you instantly recognize them as true because it's not what you expect. You see, that's the difference between the authentic and the typical. The typical is like the postcard image. It's what you expect. The authentic is what you know is true because it's not what you expect. That's about that. There, the two processes are the same. But when I make a documentary, I try to create the entire film out of such moments. The same is true with a drama. And that means that I'm constantly trying to create situations in collaboration with my participants, which I hope or imagine might push all of us, me too, beyond my comfort zone into a place where, within the safe space of making a film, where something unexpected and surprising happens that illuminates the mystery that I'm exploring that's compelled me to make the film. And that in a certain way, if you think of it, you're kind of always directing then it from one step removed from the actual thing. It's instead of sitting down with my documentary participants and saying, I'm really interested in this, how on earth did that happen? What might we do how might this scene illuminate that? I'm kind of engineering these situations, and it's not manipulation in the sense of deception, but it rhymes with the way my role as a child somehow, of kind of like reassuring everyone, kind of creating, trying to read what other people want and creating those conditions for them. And the beauty for me of this transition into drama was the sense of transparency and honesty and communion that actually, in the context of this story, is embodied by the gift that girl brings to this family, which they are unable to accept, the gift of honesty, emotional honesty. That ability to sit down with my collaborators and say, here's the scene I've written, I imagine this, it has to come to life through your inner life and through all your experience. Let's dig into this together without any mediation, without any engineering, without any manipulation. That felt like a coming of age for me, rather belatedly, as I just turned 50. And so I can't imagine at the moment going back. It was a healing experience to make this film.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you so much for making this film and coming here to Vienna and present it in person. Big applause for Joshua Oppenheimer,
Thank you so much.
please.